The telegram that arrived at the dusty rail station in Telluride, Colorado, on a bitter November morning in 1884 bore news that would change two lives forever. Though neither Helena Marshall nor Margaret Rose knew it yet, as they stood separated by miles of unforgiving mountain terrain. Margaret stepped off the narrow-gauge railway car wearing black from head to toe, her mourning dress absorbing what little warmth the pale sun offered at this altitude. The wind whipped through the San Juan Mountains with a ferocity that matched the emptiness in her heart. She clutched a worn carpetbag in one hand and a letter in the other, the ink smudged from being read too many times during her journey from Philadelphia. Her brown eyes, rimmed with shadows that spoke of sleepless nights and endless tears, scanned the platform for a man she had never met. A man who expected a bride, not a widow still grieving the husband who had died 3 months ago. The illness had taken Thomas quickly, leaving Margaret with debts she could never hope to repay on a seamstress's wages. His business partner had been less than kind about settling accounts, and Margaret found herself facing a choice between destitution or taking up the correspondence her late husband's cousin had started with a rancher out west. Thomas had encouraged it in his final days, knowing he was dying, desperate to ensure she would not be left alone. She had resisted, horrified at the thought of replacing him so soon. But hunger and a landlord's threats had a way of making the impossible seem merely difficult. Helena Marshall stood near his wagon, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the weathered planks. At 28, he had worked his ranch outside Telluride for 6 years, building it from nothing into something respectable. His dark hair needed cutting, curling slightly beneath his hat, and his green eyes held an intensity that came from long hours studying the land and sky for signs of weather or trouble. He had never expected to send for a mail-order bride, but loneliness had a way of changing a man's mind. The winters were long in these mountains, and after his last ranch hand had married and moved to Durango, the silence in his cabin had become unbearable. The woman who approached him looked nothing like he had imagined. The letters had been cheerful, full of questions about Colorado and descriptions of Philadelphia's streets. This woman moved like a shadow, her face pale beneath her black bonnet, her movements careful and small as though she were trying not to take up too much space in the world. "Miss Rose?" he asked, removing his hat. "Mrs. Rose," she corrected quietly, then caught herself. "I mean Miss Rose now. I am sorry, I am still adjusting." Helena frowned, confusion knitting his brow. "Mrs. I should have written. I tried to, but the letters would not have arrived before I did. My husband passed 3 months ago. I know this is not what you expected. If you want to put me back on the next train, I will understand. I have enough money for a ticket to Denver at least. I can find work there." Something in her voice, the resignation mixed with a desperate sort of pride, struck him deeply. He had known loss himself when his parents died during his teenage years, leaving him and his younger sister alone. Sarah had eventually married a good man and moved to Santa Fe, but he remembered that feeling of the world crumbling beneath your feet. "The next train does not leave until tomorrow morning," he said slowly. "You will catch your death standing out here in this wind. Come to the ranch. Get warm. Have a decent meal. We can talk about what comes next when you are not about to freeze." Margaret searched his face for cruelty or expectation and found neither. "I do not want to impose. If I thought it was an imposition, I would not have offered. My mother raised me better than that." He reached for her bag, and after a moment's hesitation, she let him take it. The ride to the ranch took over an hour, following a winding trail that climbed through stands of aspen and pine. Margaret sat beside him on the wagon seat, her hands folded in her lap, trying not to notice how solid his presence felt beside her or how guilty she felt for noticing. She had loved Thomas. She still loved Thomas. The gold band on her finger seemed to burn against her skin. "How long have you been in Colorado?" she asked finally, unable to bear the silence any longer. 6 years. Came out after my parents died. Could not stand Boston anymore. All those people offering condolences they did not mean. Figured the mountains might be quieter. Are they? Depends on the day. The land has its own way of talking if you listen. Coyotes at night, wind in the pines, thunder rolling through the valleys. But it does not pretend to be something it is not, and I appreciate that. Margaret considered this. I have never been anywhere so open. Philadelphia felt like it was closing in on me after Thomas died. Every street corner had a memory. I imagine that makes it hard to breathe. Yes, she whispered. Exactly that. The ranch, when it came into view, was modest but well maintained. A log cabin with a stone chimney stood at the center, smoke rising from the fire within. A barn housed several horses, and a fenced pasture held a small herd of cattle. The San Juan Mountains rose in every direction, their peaks already white with snow that would not melt until spring. Inside, the cabin was warmer than Margaret expected. A fire blazed in the hearth, and though the furnishings were simple, everything was clean and orderly. She noticed details that spoke of care: curtains on the windows, books on a shelf, a quilt draped over the back of a chair that showed skill in its making. "My sister made that before she married," Helena said, noticing her gaze. "Said I needed at least one thing in here that did not look like a bachelor lived alone. It's beautiful work. I will tell her you said so. She worries I am living like a hermit up here." He moved to the stove and began stoking the fire. "I have stew from yesterday. Not fancy, but it will stick to your ribs. You look like you have not eaten properly in weeks." Margaret wanted to protest, but her stomach betrayed her with a low growl. She could not remember her last full meal. "Thank you." As he prepared the food, she found herself watching him move around the kitchen with surprising competence. Most men she knew in Philadelphia would not have known where to begin. Thomas certainly had not, though she had loved him anyway. "I should explain about the letters," she said as he placed a bowl before her. "My husband's cousin, James, started the correspondence with you. Thomas was already ill, though we did not know how serious it was at first. When it became clear he would not recover, he asked me to continue writing. He said he could not bear the thought of leaving me alone with no prospects. I told him it was too soon, that I could not imagine remarrying. But after he died, the debts came due and I had nowhere else to turn." Helena sat across from her, his own bowl untouched. "That must have been an impossible situation. I felt like I was betraying him every time I wrote to you, but I also knew he had wanted this for me. He made me promise at the end that I would come out here, that I would try to find some kind of future." Tears welled in her eyes and she blinked them back angrily. "I apologize. I have been crying for months. You would think I would have run out of tears by now. Grief does not work on a schedule. My mother died first, then my father followed 6 months later. The doctor said it was his heart, but I always thought he just did not want to live without her. I cried at strange times for over a year, still do sometimes when something reminds me of them." Margaret looked at him with new understanding. "How old were you?" 17. Sarah was 15. "Old enough to not need a guardian, too young to really know what we were doing. But you managed. We survived. That is not quite the same thing as managing, but we learned and eventually things got easier. Not better exactly, just easier to carry." They ate in companionable silence and Margaret found herself relaxing slightly. The stew was good, rich and hearty, and the warmth of the cabin began to seep into her bones. She had been cold for so long, it seemed, that she had almost forgotten what comfort felt like. "I should be honest with you about expectations," Helena said as he cleared their bowls. "I sent for a bride because I was lonely, and because this ranch needs more than one person to run it properly. I wanted a partnership, someone to build a life with. But I am not going to hold you to an agreement made under false circumstances. You are grieving your husband. That is not something you can just set aside because it is inconvenient. What are you suggesting? Stay for a while. Help around the place if you are feeling up to it, or just rest if you need to. Give yourself time to figure out what you actually want, not what circumstances are forcing on you. When spring comes, if you want to leave, I will give you money for a ticket wherever you want to go and enough to get you started somewhere new. Why would you do that? Because you deserve to have a choice." He met her eyes steadily. "And because I would rather be alone than married to someone who feels trapped." Margaret felt something in her chest loosen, a knot she had not realized she was carrying. "What if I cannot pay you back? I am not asking you to. Consider it payment for help around the ranch if you need a reason. Lord knows I could use someone who can cook better than I can." Despite everything, she felt her lips twitch in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "That is a low bar to clear. Then you should have no trouble." He stood and moved toward a door at the back of the cabin. "The bedroom is through here. I will sleep out here by the fire. Sheets are clean. I changed them last week. I cannot take your bed. You can and you will. I have slept in worse places than in front of a warm fire. Do not argue with me on this, Miss Rose. You have had a long journey and you need proper rest." Too exhausted to fight, Margaret nodded. She gathered her carpet bag and moved toward the bedroom, pausing in the doorway. "Mr. Marshall, Helena, please. Helena, thank you for being kind when you had every right not to be." "I will give you reasons to smile again, Margaret. I do not know how yet, but I promise you that. Nobody should carry that much sadness alone." That night, lying in a bed that smelled of pine soap and mountain air, Margaret cried for the last time over Thomas. Not because her grief was finished, but because for the first time since his death, she felt like she might survive it. And somehow, that thought carried both pain and relief in equal measure. The next weeks fell into a rhythm neither of them had anticipated. Margaret rose early, unable to sleep past dawn after years of city living. She would find Helena already up, tending to the animals or checking the fence lines. She began making breakfast, simple things at first, but gradually expanding as she explored his pantry and the root cellar. He had laid in good stores for winter, and she found herself actually planning meals rather than just forcing down whatever was quickest. Helena watched her begin to come alive in small increments. The first morning she appeared without her black bonnet, her brown hair braided simply down her back. He felt like he had won a small victory. The first time she walked out to the barn without being asked, to collect eggs from the chickens he kept, he noticed her step seemed lighter. And the first time she laughed, a startled sound when one of his horses nuzzled her shoulder looking for an apple, he felt his heart do something strange in his chest. He kept his promise about giving her space, never pressing her about the future or what she might decide. Instead, he found himself telling her stories as they worked side by side. About learning to break horses from an old Mexican rancher who had taken pity on a young man who knew nothing about the West. About the time he had gotten lost in a snowstorm and spent 2 days in a cave with nothing but his horse and a single blanket. About Sarah's wedding and how proud he had been walking her down the aisle. "You miss her?" Margaret asked one afternoon as they sat on the porch, shelling the last of the summer's beans for drying. "Every day. But I am glad she is happy. Her husband is a good man, treats her well. They have a daughter now, almost 2 years old. Sarah sends me drawings the girl makes, just scribbles really, but Sarah insists they are masterpieces." "That sounds lovely. You have siblings, Margaret's hand stilled. A brother, William. He is 3 years older. We have not spoken since my wedding. Why not? He did not approve of Thomas. Said he was too old for me, that he was marrying me for my needlework skills rather than affection. We fought terribly, and William said if I married Thomas, he would consider me dead to his family. She resumed shelling beans, her movements sharp. So I did, and he did. My parents followed William's lead. I wrote to them when Thomas died, thinking perhaps that would change things. The letter came back unopened. That must have hurt. It did. It does. But Thomas loved me, regardless of what William believed. He was kind and patient, and he appreciated my work. Perhaps he was not passionate in the way books describe, but he was steady. I thought that would be enough. Was it? She considered the question carefully. I think it might have been if we had more time. We were only married 18 months before he got sick. I was just beginning to feel like I understood how to be married when suddenly I was planning a funeral instead. Helena wanted to ask more, wanted to understand her, but he could see the conversation was painful. Instead, he shifted topics. Have you ever ridden a horse? She looked startled. No, ladies in Philadelphia use carriages. Then tomorrow I am teaching you. Cannot live on a ranch and not know how to ride. Besides, there is a valley about an hour from here that you should see before the snow gets too deep. Most beautiful view in all of Colorado, in my opinion. I am not sure that is appropriate. What is not appropriate about learning a useful skill? I am in mourning. Margaret. He said her name gently but firmly. I respect your grief, I do. But Thomas asked you to come out here to find a future. I do not think he meant for you to lock yourself away and never experience anything again. Learning to ride a horse is not betraying his memory. She looked down at her hands, still wearing that gold band. I do not know how to do this. How to move forward without feeling guilty. One small step at a time. Tomorrow you learn to ride. That is all, just one thing. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. Helena brought out a gentle mare named Daisy, who had the patience of a saint and the disposition of a lazy house cat. Margaret appeared in her black dress, and he frowned. You have anything else to wear? That dress is going to get caught on everything. I have another mourning dress, but it is essentially the same. What about from before? I sold most of my things to help pay Thomas's debts. The rest I left behind because I could not afford the freight charges. Helena disappeared into the cabin and returned with a pair of his old work pants and a shirt. These will be too big, but we can make them work with a belt. You can wear them under your dress for modesty if you want, but trust me, trying to ride side saddle on these mountain trails is asking for trouble. Margaret took the clothes, scandalized and intrigued in equal measure. She had never worn pants in her life. But she had also never done a lot of things that were now becoming part of her daily existence. In the bedroom, she changed, rolling up the pant legs and cinching the belt as tight as it would go. The shirt hung loose, but it was warm and surprisingly comfortable. She looked at herself in the small mirror on the wall and barely recognized the woman looking back. Definitely not a proper Philadelphia seamstress anymore. Helena's expression when she emerged made her self-conscious. Is it terrible? No, he said, his voice slightly rough. It is fine. Good. Let us get you on that horse. The lesson began with Margaret learning to approach Daisy properly, letting the mare smell her hand and get comfortable with her presence. Helena's instructions were patient and clear, his hand steady when he helped her mount. She was acutely aware of his touch, even through layers of fabric, and felt guilty about that awareness. Relax, he instructed. Daisy can feel your tension. She is going to think there is something to be nervous about. Just breathe. Easier said than done when she was sitting on top of an animal that seemed impossibly tall and much stronger than she was. But gradually, as Helena led them around the corral, she began to find the rhythm of it. By the end of the hour, she was guiding Daisy herself, her confidence growing with each circuit. "Ready to try the trail?" Helena asked. "All ready. Daisy knows the way, and I will be right beside you. You are doing better than I did my first time." I fell off 3 times before I got the hang of it. The image of him tumbling from a horse made her smile, the expression feeling strange on her face after so long. I find that hard to believe. I swear on my mother's grave. Ask Sarah if you do not believe me. She never lets me forget it. They rode out slowly, following a trail that climbed through the pine forests. The air was crisp and clean, scented with pine and cold stone. Margaret found herself breathing deeply, feeling something she had not felt in months. Not happiness exactly, but not the crushing weight of grief either. Something lighter, something almost like peace. The valley, when they reached it, took her breath away. It spread out below them, a sweep of golden grass rimmed by mountains on all sides. A stream cut through the center, its water catching the sunlight like scattered diamonds. Elk grazed in the distance, their antlers massive and regal. "Oh," she breathed, "it is beautiful. I come up here when I need to think, when the walls of the cabin feel too close. This place reminds me that the world is bigger than whatever problem I am wrestling with." They dismounted, and Helena pulled a canteen from his saddlebag, offering it to her. Margaret drank, the water cold and sweet, tasting of snow melt and stone. They sat on a fallen log, the horses grazing nearby, and for a long moment neither spoke. "Thomas would have loved this," Margaret said finally. "He always talked about seeing the mountains. He grew up in New York City and had never been further west than Pittsburgh. I think that was part of why he encouraged the correspondence with you, even beyond wanting me settled. He wanted me to have adventures he knew he would never have. He sounds like he was a good man. He was, not perfect but good. He deserved more time. So did my parents, so does everyone who dies before they are ready, but I have learned that we cannot live for the dead. We can honor them, remember them, but we have to live for ourselves. Otherwise, what is the point?" Margaret twisted the ring on her finger, sliding it up and down. "I have been thinking about taking this off, but every time I start to, I feel like I am erasing him." "You are not erasing anything. The ring does not hold your memories. Those are in here." He tapped his chest over his heart. "Taking it off just means you are acknowledging that life continues, that you are allowed to continue. When did you become so wise?" "I am not wise. I am just further along in the process than you are. And I made a lot of mistakes getting here, so maybe I am helping you avoid some of the same ones." She looked at him, really looked at him, seeing past the rancher and the stranger to the man beneath. He had a good face, she decided. Honest, kind, the kind of face you could trust. And his eyes, when they met hers, held no expectation or pressure, just patience and understanding. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said. "Thank you for being brave enough to learn something new." They rode back as the sun began its descent, painting the mountains in shades of gold and rose. Margaret's legs ached, and she knew she would be sore tomorrow, but she felt more alive than she had in months. As they approached the ranch, she saw smoke rising from a campfire near the barn that had not been there when they left. Helena tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward the rifle on his saddle. "Stay behind me." But as they got closer, he relaxed, letting out a breath. "It is just Sam." A man stood as they approached, tall and weathered, with gray streaking through his dark hair. He wore a deputy's badge on his vest and a welcoming smile on his face. "Helena Marshall, you are harder to track down than a mountain cat in winter," the man called. "I have been waiting 2 hours. Sam Thornton, what brings you up this way?" Last I heard you were keeping law and order down in Telluride. Still am, but I needed to ride out and warn folks about some trouble heading this direction." His eyes moved to Margaret with curiosity and respect. "Madam," Margaret rose, "this is Sam Thornton. We have been friends since I first arrived in Colorado. He is the one who taught me not to shoot myself in the foot, literally." "Nice to meet you," Margaret said, dismounting with more grace than she would have managed that morning. "Likewise. Helena, can we talk?" They moved off to the side, their voices low. Margaret took care of Daisy, surprised at how natural it already felt to remove the saddle and brush down the mare. Through the barn door she could see the men in conversation, their expressions serious. When they returned, Helena's jaw was tight. "Sam is going to stay for dinner and head back at first light. We have some things to discuss." Over a meal of venison and potatoes, Sam explained the situation. A gang had been working its way through the mountain towns, hitting isolated ranches and small mining camps. They were not above violence and several people had been hurt. "How many?" Helena asked. "4 that we know of. They hit the Jennings place 3 days ago, took all their winter stores and shot Frank Jennings when he tried to stop them. He will live, but it was close. Sheriff Wilson is organizing the ranchers to keep watch, but with places as spread out as they are up here, it is hard to protect everyone." Margaret felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Are we in danger?" "Possibly," Sam said, not sugarcoating it. "Your place is remote enough that they might pass it by. But they also might see it as an easy target, especially if they spot Margaret. Forgive me for being blunt, madam, but women are scarce out here, and men like that do not have much in the way of morals." Helena's expression darkened. "She is under my protection. Anyone who tries to touch her will answer to me." "I figured as much. But Helena, you are one man. If all 4 come at once, you are going to need help. What do you suggest? Come into town for a while, stay at the hotel until we catch them. Plenty of people there, safety in numbers. And leave my ranch unattended. They will burn it to the ground just for spite. Better that than you dead." They argued back and forth while Margaret sat quietly, processing this new threat. She had come west to escape one set of problems only to find herself in the middle of another. But strangely, she did not feel the same paralysis that had gripped her in Philadelphia. Perhaps because this danger was immediate and external, something she could potentially act against, rather than the slow suffocation of debt and grief. "What if someone stayed with us?" she asked, interrupting the men. "You said ranchers are organizing. Could someone come here? Divide the numbers so we have help, but Helena does not have to abandon his property." Sam considered this. "That could work. The Hanson brothers are looking for a place to wait out the trouble. Their place is even more remote than yours, and they do not have much worth stealing anyway. 2 extra guns would even the odds considerably." Helena nodded slowly. "I know the Hansons. They are good men. When can they get here?" "I will send them up tomorrow if you are agreeable. They will bring their own supplies, will not be a burden. Tell them to come. And Sam, thank you for the warning." After Sam left, riding back toward town despite the gathering darkness, Helena checked every window and door twice, loading rifles and placing them at strategic points around the cabin. "I will not let anything happen to you," he said as Margaret banked the fire for the night. "I promise you that. I know you will do everything you can, but Helena, you cannot control everything. Life has taught me that lesson rather thoroughly. Then let me at least try. I have already started caring what happens to you, Margaret, more than is probably wise given the circumstances, but I cannot seem to help it." His words hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Margaret felt her heart respond before her mind could stop it, a flutter of something she had no right to feel. Not yet, maybe not ever. I should go to bed, she said, avoiding his eyes. Tomorrow will be busy if we are expecting guests. He let her retreat but called after her softly. I meant what I said that first day. I am going to give you reasons to smile again, even if bandits and tragedy keep trying to get in the way. The Hanson brothers arrived midday the following afternoon, two broad-shouldered men in their 30s who carried themselves with the easy confidence of people who knew how to survive in harsh country. Eric was the older by 2 years, quieter and more observant. Lars had a booming laugh and a talent for storytelling that filled the cabin with warmth. They fell into a routine quickly. The men took turns on watch, never leaving the ranch without at least 2 people staying behind. Margaret found herself grateful for the company, even as the threat of violence hung over them. Lars taught her how to shoot, setting up targets behind the barn and patiently correcting her stance and aim. "You have got steady hands," he observed after she hit 3 targets in a row. "You do this before. I was a seamstress. Steady hands are a requirement." "Well, it is serving you well now. You might not be a crack shot, but you can defend yourself if you need to. That is what matters." Eric proved to be an excellent cook, much to everyone's surprise and delight. He took over the evening meals, creating hearty dishes that stretched their supplies while still managing to be delicious. It was during these dinners that Margaret began to laugh again, really laugh, at Lars's outrageous stories and Eric's dry commentary. Helena watched her come alive and found himself falling harder each day. The way she hummed while doing dishes, completely unaware of it. The way she tended the chickens with such gentleness, talking to them like they were her friends. The way she looked in the morning light, her hair loose around her shoulders before she braided it, like spun silk catching the sun. He tried to keep his distance, knowing she was not ready for his feelings. But it was becoming increasingly difficult, especially when she would catch his eye across the room and smile, that small secret smile that felt like it was just for him. 3 weeks into the Hanson brothers' stay, Margaret made a decision. In the privacy of the bedroom, she removed her wedding ring, pressing it to her lips one last time before wrapping it carefully in a handkerchief and placing it in her carpet bag. Her hand felt naked without it, but also lighter, as though she had set down a weight she had been carrying too long. At dinner that night, Helena noticed immediately. His eyes went to her bare finger, then to her face, a question in his expression. She met his gaze steadily and nodded once, a small acknowledgement that something had shifted. After the meal, as the brothers argued good-naturedly about whose turn it was for first watch, Helena asked Margaret to step outside with him. The night was cold but clear, stars scattered across the sky in impossible profusion. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. "I will always love Thomas. He was my husband and he was good to me, but he is gone and I am still here. I think I am finally ready to accept that." "There is no rush, Margaret. I hope you know that. Whatever is happening between us, it can go as slowly as you need." "What is happening between us?" she asked, her heart racing. "I am falling in love with you," he said simply. "I probably was from the moment you stepped off that train looking like the saddest person I had ever seen, and all I wanted to do was make you smile. It has only gotten worse since then, or better. I am not sure which." "Helena, she trailed off, uncertain how to put words to what she felt, fear and hope and longing all tangled together. "I do not know if I am capable of that right now, of loving someone the way they deserve. I am not asking you to know anything. I am just telling you where I stand. You can take all the time you need to figure out where you stand. I am not going anywhere." Before she could second-guess herself, Margaret stepped forward and kissed him. It was brief and chaste, barely more than a brush of lips, but it sent electricity through them both. When she pulled back, her eyes were wide. I think I am capable of more than I thought, she whispered. Helena cupped her face gently, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. One step at a time, remember, we have all winter. But winter, it turned out, had other plans. The next morning, Lars spotted riders approaching from the south. 4 men moving with purpose and not the friendly kind. Everyone inside, Helena ordered, his voice sharp with command. Eric, take the back window. Lars, you are on the left. Margaret, you are with me at the front. They barricaded the doors and waited. The riders came into the yard slowly, spreading out in a clear tactical formation. The leader was a hard-faced man with a scar running from his eye to his jaw. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the cold air. We know you are in there. We are not looking for trouble. Just hand over your supplies and any valuables and we will be on our way. Like hell, Helena muttered. Then louder, this is private property. You need to leave now. Cannot do that, friend. We have had a hard season and we need what you have got. You can do this the easy way or the hard way, but either way, we are not leaving empty-handed. Then I guess we are doing it the hard way. The gunfight, when it erupted, was brief and brutal. The bandits had not expected organized resistance, and their surprise worked in the defenders' favor. Lars wounded one in the first exchange, sending him tumbling from his horse. Eric's shot went wide, but it forced 2 of the riders to take cover, disrupting their advance. Helena and Margaret fired together, their shots coordinated in a way that spoke of practice and trust. One bandit went down, clutching his shoulder. Another's horse panicked, throwing him hard against the frozen ground, but the leader was smart and experienced. He flanked around the barn, using it for cover, and managed to get a shot through the back window. Eric cried out, staggering back, blood blooming across his shoulder. I am fine, he gasped. Just grazed me. Keep shooting. The fight lasted perhaps 10 minutes, though it felt like hours. In the end, 2 bandits lay dead in the yard. One was wounded and had fled on horseback, and the leader had disappeared back down the trail, recognizing that this particular target was more trouble than it was worth. The silence after gunfire is a strange thing, filled with ringing ears and adrenaline and the slow realization that you are still alive. Margaret found herself shaking, the rifle slipping from her hands. Helena caught her immediately, pulling her against him. You did so well, he murmured. You were so brave. I was terrified. That is what makes it brave. They tended Eric's wound, which was indeed just a graze, though it bled impressively. Lars rode into town to fetch Sam and report the incident, while Helena and Margaret dealt with the bodies. It was grim work, made grimmer by the cold that had already started to stiffen the corpses. I have never seen a dead person before, Thomas, Margaret said quietly as they worked. Now I have seen 3 in as many months. I wish I could have spared you this. You did spare me. If not for you and the brothers, those men would have taken what they wanted, would have taken me. She shuddered at the thought. I am grateful, even if the method was violent. Sam arrived with the sheriff and several deputies by evening. They collected the bodies, took statements, and assured Helena that the gang was finished. The leader had been identified from Helena's description, and word would be sent to all the surrounding towns. He would not get far. You folks did good work here, Sheriff Wilson said. Probably saved a half-dozen other ranches by standing your ground. The county owes you a debt. I would rather not collect on it through more gunfights, Helena said dryly. Fair enough. But seriously, Marshall, you might consider running for deputy yourself. We could use someone like you. After they left, taking the Hanson brothers with them since Eric needed a doctor to properly clean and stitch his wound, Helena and Margaret found themselves alone again. The cabin felt enormous and quiet after weeks of crowded company. I am not sure I remember how to be just the 2 of us, Margaret said with a shaky laugh. We will relearn together." Helena stoked the fire, adding extra wood until the flames leaped high. "But first, I think we both need to process what happened today." They sat together on the couch, and gradually, Margaret found herself leaning against him, his arm around her shoulders. It felt natural and right, like coming home to a place she had never been before. "I killed a man today," she said quietly. "My bullet hit him. I saw him fall. I know. That is not an easy thing to carry. I do not feel guilty exactly. He was trying to hurt us, but I feel something. Like a piece of innocence I did not know I still had just cracked and fell away. That is normal. If you did not feel anything, I would be worried. The fact that taking a life affects you means you are still human, still good. Are you sure? Very sure." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head, the gesture tender and comforting. "You are one of the best people I have ever known," Margaret rose. "Today does not change that." They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's warmth, processing the violence and fear and relief of survival. And somewhere in those quiet hours, something between them solidified from possibility into certainty. When Margaret finally lifted her head and looked at him, her eyes were clear. "I love you," she said. "I did not think I could feel this way again. I did not think I deserved to. But I love you, Helena Marshall, and I am tired of fighting it." "Oh, thank God," he breathed before kissing her properly for the first time. It was nothing like her kiss with Thomas had been. Thomas had been gentle and careful, always afraid of overwhelming her. Helena kissed like a man who had been starving and just found sustenance, with passion and need but also tenderness. He cradled her face like she was precious, even as his lips moved against hers with growing intensity. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Margaret laughed. Actually laughed, full and genuine and free. "What is so funny?" Helena asked, his own smile wide. "You promised you would give me reasons to smile again. I think you have more than delivered. I am just getting started. Wait until you see what I have planned for spring." Winter settled over the ranch in earnest after that, heavy snows that sometimes kept them inside for days at a time. But Margaret found she did not mind. The cabin that had felt like a way station, a temporary shelter, began to feel like home. She rearranged things to suit her tastes, adding small touches that made it theirs rather than just his. Helena encouraged every change, delighted to see her claim the space. They married in January, a small ceremony in Telluride with Sam and the Hanson brothers as witnesses. Margaret wore a simple blue dress she had made herself from fabric Helena had bought as a Christmas present, its color bringing out her eyes. She walked down the aisle of the small church with her head high, no longer the shadow in mourning clothes but a woman stepping into her future with confidence. Sarah made the trip from Santa Fe, despite the winter weather, bringing her husband and daughter. She embraced Margaret like a sister before the ceremony, whispering, "Thank you for making my brother happy again. He has been alone too long." "He is the one who saved me," Margaret replied. "I think you saved each other. That is how the best marriages work." The wedding night was tender and passionate, filled with discovery and joy. Margaret had been nervous, worried that she would compare Helena to Thomas or feel guilty about moving on. But when Helena touched her, all thoughts of the past evaporated, leaving only the present moment and the future they were building together. "I love you," he whispered against her skin. "I will love you every day for the rest of my life." "And I will love you," she promised. "Thank you for being patient with me, for giving me time to heal. You are worth waiting for. You are worth everything." Spring came eventually, as it always does, melting the snow and coaxing green shoots from the still cold ground. Margaret planted a garden, something she had always wanted but never had space for in Philadelphia. She chose her seeds carefully, planning for vegetables that would feed them through the next winter, and flowers that would bring beauty to their small piece of wilderness. Helena expanded the herd, buying several new breeding cows and a young bull from a rancher in Durango. The ranch was beginning to thrive in ways it never had when he worked it alone. Having a partner, someone to share the burden and the decisions, made all the difference. In May, Margaret discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, her body behaving in familiar ways she remembered from an early pregnancy she had lost during her marriage to Thomas, a grief she had never shared with anyone. But this time felt different, stronger. When she told Helena, he lifted her off her feet and spun her around, his joy uncontainable. "We are going to have a baby," he kept repeating like he could not quite believe it. "We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Margaret asked, though his reaction made the question unnecessary. Happy does not even begin to cover it. Terrified, excited, overwhelmed, but mostly happy. So incredibly happy. They made plans, building a cradle from pine wood, setting aside one corner of the cabin for the nursery. Sarah sent packages of baby clothes and advice, some helpful, some hilariously specific. The Hanson brothers stopped by regularly, bringing gifts and teasing Helena about impending fatherhood. "You are going to be one of those fathers who spoils their children rotten," Lars predicted. "Absolutely," Helena agreed without shame. "That is my right as a parent." Margaret bloomed with pregnancy, her face filling out, color in her cheeks that had been absent when she arrived. She felt beautiful in a way she never had before, powerful and creative, her body doing something miraculous. Helena told her she was gorgeous every single day, and the way he looked at her left no doubt he meant it. In late autumn, as the aspens turned gold and the first frost kissed the high peaks, their son was born. The labor was long and difficult, attended by a midwife from Telluride who Helena had insisted on bringing to the ranch a week before the due date, just in case. Margaret labored through the night and into the next morning, Helena holding her hand through every contraction, whispering encouragement and love. When the baby finally arrived, squalling and perfect, the midwife placed him on Margaret's chest with a smile. "You have a healthy boy. Congratulations." Margaret looked down at her son, this tiny person she and Helena had made together, and felt tears stream down her face. But these were not tears of grief or pain. These were tears of overwhelming joy, of gratitude, of love so intense it almost frightened her. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We are so glad you are here." Helena was crying too, unashamed, his hand touching the baby's tiny head with awe. "He is perfect. You are perfect. Thank you for this gift, Margaret. Thank you." They named him Henry Thomas Lawson, honoring Helena's father and Margaret's first husband. It felt right to Margaret, a way of acknowledging the past while celebrating the present. Thomas would have been happy for her, she thought. He had wanted her to find joy again, and she had found more than she ever imagined possible. The years that followed were not without challenges. Ranching was hard work, and the mountains could be unforgiving. They faced harsh winters and dry summers, predators that threatened the herd and accidents that were part of life in wild country. But they faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each obstacle overcome. 2 years after Henry's birth, Margaret gave birth to a daughter they named Grace Ellen, for Helena's mother. She had her father's green eyes and her mother's quiet determination. Henry adored his baby sister, always wanting to hold her and show her his treasures from around the ranch. Sarah and her family visited regularly, and gradually, the ranch became a gathering place for their growing circle of friends. The Hanson brothers built a place just over the ridge and found wives of their own, mail-order brides who arrived with hope rather than grief. Sam eventually married a widow who ran the general store in Telluride, and their combined families filled the cabin with noise and laughter during holidays. Margaret never heard from her brother or parents again, though she continued to write occasional letters, leaving the door open for reconciliation that never came. It hurt, but the pain had dulled to a distant ache. She had created her own family, chosen and beloved, and that was enough. One evening in early summer, when Henry was 6 and Grace was 4, the family sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold. The children were chasing fireflies, their laughter carrying on the warm air. Helena's arm was around Margaret's shoulders, her head resting against him in comfortable companionship. "You remember that first day?" he asked. "When you stepped off the train looking like the weight of the world was on your shoulders. I remember thinking I had made a terrible mistake. That I should have just stayed in Philadelphia and found a way to survive there. I am glad you did not, so am I, though I am sure I tested your patience those first weeks. You were grieving. You needed time, not patience." He kissed the top of her head, a gesture that had become habitual over the years. "I told you I would give you reasons to smile again. Did I manage it?" Margaret looked at their children, their home, the life they had built together from nothing but hope and determination. She thought about the woman she had been, arriving in mourning clothes with a heart that felt broken beyond repair. And she thought about the woman she had become, confident and loved, a mother and wife and partner in every sense of the word. "You did more than that," she said, tilting her face up to kiss him. "You gave me a life worth living, a family worth cherishing, a love I did not think was possible after Thomas died. You gave me everything, Helena. We gave each other everything. That is how this works." Henry came running up the porch steps, breathless and excited. "Mama, Papa, I caught 3 fireflies. Come see." Grace was right behind him, her hands cupped carefully. "I got 2, Helena stood, reaching down to pull Margaret up with him. They followed their children into the yard, exclaiming over captured fireflies that glowed softly in small hands. And as the stars began to appear overhead, filling the vast western sky with light, Margaret felt a contentment so deep it seemed to radiate from her bones. She had come west in mourning clothes, her heart encased in grief, unable to see beyond the next day. And Helena Marshall, with his patience and kindness and love, had not just given her reasons to smile. He had given her reasons to live fully, to love deeply, to embrace the future without forgetting the past. He had given her a home in the wilderness, a family that grew and thrived, and a partnership that made every challenge bearable and every joy sweeter. The ranch continued to prosper over the following years. Helena's careful management and Margaret's sharp mind for accounts made them successful by mountain standards. They never became wealthy, but they were comfortable, able to afford small luxuries and help neighbors when times were hard. Their reputation for fairness and generosity spread, and people knew that the Marshall Ranch was a place where you could find help if you needed it. When Henry turned 10, Helena began teaching him the business of ranching in earnest. The boy took to it naturally, having his father's affinity for animals and the land. Grace, meanwhile, showed her mother's talent with a needle, creating beautiful embroidered pieces that Margaret proudly displayed or gave as gifts. But Grace also loved riding, and Helena taught her to rope and herd cattle just as thoroughly as he taught Henry, believing that women should know how to survive on their own in this country. Margaret taught both children to read and write, using books that Helena ordered from Denver and Salt Lake City. Education was important to her, a gift her own parents had given her that she was determined to pass on. On winter evenings, the family would gather around the fire while she read aloud. everything from adventure stories to Shakespeare to scientific treatises. Helena would often pause her to explain something about ranching or the mountains, turning every story into a lesson about their life. In the summer of 1893, when Margaret was 33 and Helena was 37, they received unexpected visitors. A young woman stepped off the train in Telluride wearing traveling clothes and carrying a baby. She asked directions to the Marshall Ranch, and when Sam, who happened to be at the station, asked her business, she simply said, "I am looking for someone who understands new beginnings." Sam, remembering Margaret's arrival nearly a decade before, brought the woman himself. Her name was Josephine, and she had been a widow in St. Louis before circumstances forced her to flee west. She had heard stories about Margaret Marshall, the mail-order bride who arrived in mourning clothes and built a life in the mountains. Stories that gave her hope that she might do the same. Margaret welcomed Josephine with open arms, recognizing her own past in the younger woman's eyes. She and Helena housed her for 2 weeks while Sam quietly made inquiries and determined that Josephine was not exaggerating the danger she had fled. A violent man with connections had made her life impossible after her husband's death from illness. Together, Margaret and Helena helped Josephine find a situation with a mining widow in Telluride who needed a companion and someone to help with her 3 young children. It was not romance or marriage, but it was safety and purpose, which Josephine needed far more urgently. Margaret visited her regularly, their friendship developing into something deep and lasting. Years later, Josephine would marry a kind shopkeeper and have 2 more children, but she never forgot the couple who gave her shelter when she needed it most. That act of kindness became something of a pattern. Over the years, several women and a few men found their way to the Marshall Ranch, refugees from various circumstances who needed help starting over. Margaret and Helena never turned anyone away, providing temporary shelter, connections to jobs, or simply advice from people who understood what it meant to rebuild a life from rubble. "We are collecting strays," Helena joked one evening after they had helped a young man fleeing an abusive father find work with the Hanson brothers. "We are helping people who need it," Margaret corrected. "Just like Sam helped you when you first arrived and you helped me. That is what decent people do. I am not complaining, just observing that our quiet ranch has become something of a refuge. Does it bother you? Not even a little bit. I am proud of what we have built here, and I am proud that people trust us enough to come when they need help." In 1895, Margaret gave birth to their 3rd child, another boy they named James after Helena's grandfather. The pregnancy had been unexpected, and Margaret, at 35, had worried about complications. But James arrived healthy and loud, announcing his presence to the world with impressive volume. Henry and Grace were old enough to be genuinely helpful, entertaining their baby brother and taking on extra chores so Margaret could rest. The ranch had to expand to accommodate their growing family. Helena built an addition to the cabin, adding 2 more bedrooms and enlarging the kitchen. The new space felt luxurious after years of everyone crowded together. Margaret planted more flowers around the expanded porch, creating a riot of color that bloomed from spring through fall. Sam retired from his deputy position that same year, though he stayed active in the community. He and his wife became even more frequent visitors, their own children close in age to the Marshall children. The families would spend entire days together, the children playing while the adults talked and worked on various projects. One afternoon, as Margaret and Sam's wife, Clara, sat shelling peas while watching the children, Clara said, "You know, half the women in Telluride think you are the luckiest woman alive. To have found Helena, to have this place, these beautiful children." "I know I am fortunate," Margaret said carefully, "but luck had little to do with it. I made a choice to come west, and Helena made a choice to give me time to heal. We worked for this life. It was not handed to us." That is what I always tell them, but they do not see the work, only the result. Clara paused. "I am glad you came, Margaret, not just for Helena's sake, but for all of us. You made this community better just by being part of it." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes, moved by the simple sincerity of the statement. "Thank you. That means more than you know." As James grew from infant to toddler, his personality emerged. He was fearless in a way that gave Margaret heart palpitations, always climbing too high or running too fast. Helena would laugh and say the boy had mounting goat blood, while Margaret fretted and tried to instill some sense of caution. In the end, they compromised, with Helena teaching James how to climb safely and Margaret insisting on reasonable limits. Henry, at 12, was already taller than his mother and showing signs of becoming as tall as his father. He had a steady, responsible nature that made both parents confident in his future. Grace, at 10, was more mercurial, artistic and passionate, prone to dramatic pronouncements and equally dramatic reconciliations. She kept the whole family entertained with her stories and drawings. The turn of the century came quietly to the mountains. In some cities, there were grand celebrations marking the new era. On the Marshall Ranch, they acknowledged it with a special dinner and Helena reading a newspaper account of New York's festivities to the family. But mostly, life continued as it had, governed by seasons and weather and the needs of the land and animals. In 1902, tragedy touched their lives when Sam died suddenly of a heart attack. He was only 53, and his death shocked everyone who knew him. Helena took it particularly hard, having lost one of his oldest friends and mentors. Margaret held him as he grieved, offering the same patience and understanding he had given her all those years ago. "He taught me how to survive in this country," Helena said at the funeral. "More than that, he taught me how to be a good man in a place that does not always reward goodness. I will miss him every day." They helped Clara through the first terrible months, ensuring she had firewood and supplies, helping her make decisions about whether to stay in Telluride or move closer to her daughter in Grand Junction. In the end, she stayed, too rooted in the community to leave, and Margaret made sure she was never alone unless she chose to be. Henry turned 16 in 1901, and Helena gave him a quarter section of land adjacent to the ranch, planning for the day when his son would want to build his own place. It was a generous gift, one that acknowledged Henry's contributions to the ranch and his coming manhood. The boy was overwhelmed, promising to make his parents proud. Grace, at 14, announced she wanted to go to Denver to study art. Margaret and Helena spent long evenings discussing it, weighing their daughter's talent and passion against the dangers of a young woman alone in a city. In the end, they compromised again, agreeing that Grace could go for a summer term when she turned 16, staying with Sarah's family, who had since moved to Denver for her husband's business. "When did our children get so old?" Margaret asked one night as they prepared for bed. "When we were not paying attention," Helena replied, pulling her close. "But I am not sorry. Watching them grow into who they are supposed to be is one of the great privileges of my life. Even when it terrifies you, especially then. If we were not terrified, it would mean we did not care enough." Margaret kissed him, the gesture familiar after years of marriage but still capable of stirring warmth in her chest. "I love you. Even after all these years, I am still grateful you were the man waiting at that train station. And I am grateful you were brave enough to step off the train. Everything good in my life flows from that moment." They made love slowly, taking their time, their bodies knowing each other well enough that words were often unnecessary. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Margaret thought about that frightened young widow in mourning clothes. She could barely remember being that person, so far had she come. The years continued to flow past like the streams cutting through the mountains, each season bringing its own challenges and joys. James grew into a miniature version of his father, charming and capable, with a gift for gentling difficult horses. Grace did go to Denver and returned with a portfolio of work that showed real promise. She eventually opened a small studio in Telluride, supporting herself through her art while still living close to family. Henry married at 22, choosing a rancher's daughter named Alice who fit into the family as if she had always been there. They built a house on his land and started working toward their own success. Helena and Margaret became grandparents in 1909, when Henry and Alice had a daughter they named Margaret Helen, combining both grandmothers' names. Holding her first grandchild, Margaret felt the circle of life complete itself. She was 49 now, her hair showing silver at the temples, her hands roughened by years of work. But she felt more beautiful than she ever had at 23, because she was loved and valued and part of something larger than herself. "You are crying again," Helena teased gently, though his own eyes were wet. "Happy tears. Those do not count. All your tears count, but I prefer these ones." They settled into the rhythms of older parenthood and new grandparenthood, still working the ranch, but beginning to pass more responsibility to Henry and James, who at 18 was proving to be as capable as his older brother. Grace continued to thrive with her art, and the family took pride in seeing her work displayed in shops and homes throughout the region. In the summer of 1912, Margaret received a letter that shocked her to her core. It was from a lawyer in Philadelphia, informing her that her brother William had died and left her a portion of his estate. The letter explained that William had regretted their estrangement, especially after their parents passed, but had been too proud to reach out. His will included a note to Margaret, apologizing for his stubbornness and expressing hope that she had found happiness despite his cruelty. Margaret wept over that letter, grieving the relationship that could have been, the years of connection lost to pride and anger. But she also felt a sense of closure. William had acknowledged his mistake, even if it came too late for reconciliation. That was something. "You want to go back?" Helena asked. "To see where he is buried, settle the estate?" Margaret considered it, then shook her head. "No. That part of my life is finished. Everything I care about is here." She used the inheritance William left her to establish a fund that helped widows and orphans in the Telluride area, seeing it as a way to honor both William's memory and her own journey. The Margaret Rose Fund, as it came to be known, assisted dozens of people over the years, providing small amounts of money that made the difference between survival and destitution. The years softened them both, but not in a bad way. Helena's hair went completely gray, making him look distinguished rather than old. Margaret's face gained lines that mapped every smile and worry, each one earned. They moved a bit slower, worked fewer hours, and let the younger generation take over more of the physical labor. But they were still partners, still best friends, still in love. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1910, the family threw them a party that drew people from all over the county. Stories were told about the mail-order bride in mourning clothes and the cowboy who promised to make her smile. About the bandits they fought off, the people they helped, the life they built through determination and love. Helena gave a toast that left no dry eyes in the room. 25 years ago, I was waiting at a train station for a woman I had never met, hoping for companionship and maybe affection if I was lucky. What I got was so much more than that. Margaret gave me purpose and partnership. She gave me children and grandchildren. She gave me a reason to be better than I thought I could be. And yes, I gave her reasons to smile again. But she gave me reasons to live fully, to love deeply, to build something meaningful. So this toast is to my wife, my partner, my greatest adventure. Here is to 25 more years. You will be in your 70s, Sarah called out, laughing. Then I will be a very lucky man in my 70s, Helena replied, pulling Margaret close and kissing her thoroughly while their children groaned and their grandchildren giggled. As the party wound down and guests departed, Margaret and Helena stood on their porch, watching the sun set over the mountains they had called home for so long. 3 generations of family filled their house, the sound of laughter and conversation drifting through the windows. This was their legacy, Margaret thought. Not the ranch or the money or the land, but the family and community they had nurtured into being. "Do you have any regrets?" Helena asked, reading her contemplative mood. Margaret considered the question seriously. "I regret that Thomas did not get more time. I regret the years I lost with William, but everything else, even the hard parts, brought me here. Brought me to you in this life. So no, I do not regret any of it." "Good, neither do I." They stood together as the stars emerged, one by one, filling the vast western sky. And Margaret Rose Marshall, who had arrived in Colorado as a widow in mourning clothes with a broken heart and no hope for the future, felt nothing but gratitude for the journey that had brought her home. The final years of their story unfolded with the gentle inevitability of a river finding its way to the sea. Helena and Margaret continued to live on the ranch, surrounded by family, contributing what they could as age made some tasks difficult. They were there to welcome 3 more grandchildren, to watch Grace marry a teacher from Montrose who appreciated her artistic soul, to see James take over the main ranch operations with skill and care. In 1918, Helena fell ill with pneumonia. At 62, his body could not fight it as a younger man's might have. Margaret nursed him through the crisis, sitting by his bedside day and night, refusing to leave even when the children begged her to rest. He pulled through, but the illness left him weaker, less able to handle the altitude and harsh winters. "We should move down to Montrose," Grace suggested. "The climate is milder and we could visit regularly." But Helena refused to leave the ranch that had been his life's work. "I will die here on this land. That is not negotiable." So they adapted, with James and Henry taking over virtually all the physical work while Helena advised and planned. Margaret continued to cook and keep house, though Alice and Henry's wife often helped. The family had become a complex web of support, everyone contributing, everyone valued. Helena made it another 7 years, passing peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1925 at the age of 69. Margaret woke to find him gone, his hand still in hers, his face peaceful. She sat with him for an hour, saying goodbye to the man who had given her a second chance at life, who had loved her through grief and joy, who had been her partner in every way that mattered. The funeral brought people from all over Colorado. Stories were shared about Helena's kindness, his fairness, his skill with horses and land. Margaret listened to it all, proud of the man she had married, grateful for every year they had shared. When it was her turn to speak, she kept it simple. "He told me once that he would give me reasons to smile again. He kept that promise every single day for 34 years. I hope I gave him half as much as he gave me. I hope he knew how deeply he was loved. I hope he left this world knowing his life mattered, not just to me and our family, but to everyone he touched with his generosity and grace." She lived another 8 years as a widow for the second time, but this widowhood was different from the first. She was not alone, not drowning in grief and debt and hopelessness. She was surrounded by children and grandchildren, part of a community that valued her, secure in the knowledge that she had lived a full life. She missed Helena desperately, but she did not regret their time together or wish she had protected her heart better. Loving him had been worth the pain of losing him. Margaret Rose Marshall died peacefully in 1933 at the age of 73, surrounded by 3 generations of family. Her last words were to her youngest grandson, who asked if she was scared. "No, sweetheart. I am going to see your grandfather again. How could I be scared of that?" They buried her next to Helena on a hillside overlooking the valley he had shown her on their first ride together all those years ago. The graves were marked with simple stones that bore their names and dates, and a single inscription Helena had requested in his will. "Partners in all things, together always." The ranch continued through the generations, passed from James to his children and eventually to their children. The story of the mail-order bride who arrived in mourning clothes and the cowboy who promised to make her smile became family legend, told and retold, embellished and cherished. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light hit the mountains just right, the family swore they could feel Helena and Margaret there still, watching over the land and the people they had loved. Their story a testament to the healing power of love and the courage it takes to begin again.